Good afternoon, everyone. We're Team 6, and before we start our presentation, we would like to send our great, sincere appreciation for all the amazing presentations made by the students, and a huge thank you to all the faculty members of the HFA for such a special opportunity. Today, we'll be presenting to you guys about the topic of recognizing suppressive threats entailing democracy by providing a more analytic view of the issue. As a part of the future generation, we would like to suggest information about the specific organizations and programs related to the topics, as well as our stances in perceiving the issue. Concerning SDG 16 and UNODA, we decided on this topic to address the opinion that there should be multilateral negotiations and agreements to protect security and humanity against the threat posed by emerging weapons. My name is Yoon Young-son, a junior at 청심 International Academy, and I'd like to start by introducing to you the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, also known as the UNODA, and SDG 16. The UNODA is an international organization that promotes UN member states and partners the elimination of weapons of mass destruction, also called as WMDs, and control over conventional weapons to serve the purpose of sustainable peace and development. They promote multilateral agreements in the areas of disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation to facilitate dialogues for an effective solution to help support international security. Disarmament frameworks and mechanisms work to stop arms races, build trust, and protect people from harm. Some of their progress made over the past decade include projects such as the Chemical Weapons Convention, Mine Ban Convention, Arms Trade Treaty, and so much more. Now, SDG 16, as one of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, was first established along with the other 16 goals in 2015 to aim for the concept of peace, justice, and strong institutions. Living in a world where societies with various characteristics coexist, it is unfortunate that though some have the privilege to live in prosperity, others face an endless cycle of conflict and hardships. Despite the numerous efforts to achieve peaceful, inclusive societies, it is our reality that millions of people still remain living in fragile and conflict-affected states. However, as we are living in the era of taking action towards our global goals, there is a need to address more about this inevitable issue to put an end to insecurity. It is in fact true that the UNODA objectives can connect to all 17 of the global goals, but to focus specifically on disarmament and arms control, it relates with SDG 16 Indicator 16.4, which targets significantly reducing illicit arms flows. It has been known that according to the United Nations, that at least 69,000 civilian deaths were recorded in 12 of the world's deadliest armed conflicts between 2018 and 2020. And as a matter of fact, in 2020 alone, 5 civilians per 100,000 were killed, and 1 in 7 of those deaths was a woman or a child. Facing these emerging problems, we can once again address the future endeavors of international organizations such as the UNODA. Since effective disarmament and arms control are vital for peace and security, the UNODA supports concrete control initiatives to achieve a sustainably safe environment for all. It has been mentioned in the session that access to weapons doesn't necessarily cause conflict, but there are concerns that it can encourage and prolong it. Therefore, for the sake of prevention of any conflict, effective disarmament and arms control are considered to be vital. Also, bringing attention to the disarmament agenda that suggests disarmament to save humanity, disarmament that saves lives, disarmament for future generations, and strengthening partnerships for disarmament, these implementation plans set a path for development and security. Although non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction is crucial, we should not forget the threat the possession of weapons and military power poses to the surrounding countries, ultimately creating a border crisis. We will touch upon the Latvian border crisis, in which Russia's nuclear compromise threatens Latvia's democracy and sovereignty. Yet we will also touch base on far-range threats, such as the Afghanistan war, which dates back to September 11th, 2001. Now, I would like to give the floor to our next team member to further elaborate on our topic.
So thank you. I'm Nathan from 경기수원 International School, as you guys know. And before I begin, I want everyone to think about it. You could take notes, you could draw, you could just think in your head in critical thinking about what we discuss and how does this apply to such incidents, and how does the NATO and SDG 16 also goes affiliation to UNODA. So SDG 16 and NATO are in close affiliation to UNODA in terms of non-proliferation, thus they coincide and collaborate in dire issues such as the dire Latvian crisis. A mass shooting in a major port in Latvia has catalyzed tensions between Russian minority populations and the Latvian government. And Latvia is a NATO member and Russia is a non-NATO member, creating more tensions. And as said, indicator 16.4.2 of SDG Goal 16 creates a strong foundation of illicit arms and accusing them and recognizing them in all matters. And if you see in the Latvian crisis, you could basically think that Latvia is the victim and Russia is the bully, and in human conflict, you could just say that NATO is the teacher who accuses who the bully is. And to our next slide, this is a map of Russia and Latvia. Latvia is the white star and Russia is the yellow star. But if you take a look at it, Russia and Latvia are right on the border together because Russia is a wide and huge country. Latvia joined NATO in 2004, thus falling under the protection of the United States and its ally in event of invasion as detailed in Article 5 of its treaty. I can simply say that Latvia is under a small umbrella that says Russia go away. And that umbrella is NATO Article 5 that protects Latvia under Russian regime. So if I can connect this more, if Latvia is under the umbrella and NATO Article 5 is the umbrella, we can say that Russia is the hail. I don't call it rain, it's hail, because Russia has the potential to rip that umbrella and go to Latvia as they did in Crimea. So right now, currently, NATO has 1,512 troops stationed in the Baltic countries, aided by Canadian-led battle groups. Russia has already shown its willingness to use physical power as they did in Crimea, which has been severely reprimanded for. An official Russian presence in Latvia would lead to either a direct confrontation between Latvia and the Western world, ultimately creating another nuclear war, perhaps World War III. This is a graph of Latvian ethnicity. As we know, this conflict was created with the Latvian Russians, Latvians with Russian passports, as a civil but international conflict. Now, as you can see, Russia compromises 25% of Latvians' ethnicity. That is immense, even if we compare with other races, because Latvia and Russia, they are different countries, but they have so much of its race. A Russian snap exercise has led to an additional Russian troops fighting towards the Latvian border, creating more volatile tensions. And not only that, submarines came close to Pennsylvania, close to America's borders, as in connection to Western tension. And that can really bring civil unrest, even within America. And this brings the US to the conflict, even though they are irrelevant. And this is why this tension is global. The UN has three major security priorities. One would be ensuring peace and security on a global level. Maintaining diplomacy is one of the utmost concerns when dealing with many personalities of each nation. Applying accurate level of peacekeeping that which is tailored for each, especially in regions of protecting the UN bloc. The UN supporting Latvia against Russia poses a threat to the UN bloc and its soil as a whole. Moreover, relations remain very volatile and have the potential to exacerbate amid a defense violation. Really, if you can see, Russia's worried about NATO countries and the US troops for getting close to its border, but it's not. Russia has several countries that are bordered to them, but they just don't want any Western influence to their countries. Yet, if Russia floods more troops, that poses a threat to Latvian ethnicity, sovereign rights, and human rights as a nation. And protecting our allies, this again goes back to NATO Article 5, which requires us to protect our fellow NATO countries. If one nation is attacked, the whole bloc is attacked, considered to be attacked. It's critical for overt Russian occupation to be avoided. Overt Russian occupation would force Article 5 of NATO Treaty to be either enforced, causing a physical conflict with Russia, which would have the potential to develop in a war of mass destruction. which would be disastrous to NATO's ability to use its past policy for deterrence and would be seen as a breach of trust between Latvia and the United States and Russia, which ultimately creates conflict again. And we could say that Latvia is pleading for peace and its own institutions, yet Russia wants to manipulate Latvia as they did in Crimea and Ukraine, if you didn't know about the incident. As an excuse, they're saying that they don't want any NATO militias near their borders. Well, this is nonsense, as they have several other countries bounding to them, but they are not accusing them, as they have agreements which is and potentially against some human rights violations, and which is ultimately against the democratic norms of NATO, UNODA, and UN, the Charter itself. It is also important to take into account the fact that these operatives are armed and their motives are unclear. Declaring these operatives as terrorists and declaring them as stated in Indicator 16.4.2 is very important, as we can't be an intransparency, and we need to allow other nations to know about what Russia is doing, and not only Russia, but other aggressors which are posing a threat to the UN as a whole. And lastly, implementing these recommendation policies are crucial to prevent war of mass destruction. If tensions are not mitigated through these policies and Russia gains potential to annex Latvia, this will invoke retaliation of NATO, ultimately again creating a war of mass destruction. That is exactly what happened in World War II, World War I, and the Cold War. And this has a potential as technology developed, creating more mass destruction to the general society. And again, yes, indeed, it is collective knowledge that we've gained from prior failure, and we need to use that. And as the SDGs are implemented, weapons of mass destruction, they destroy SDG, all 17 of them, not only 16, not only peace and justice, but also land, the well-being, climate, and the well-being of all animals under seas. Thus, we should give more attention to this need and the cause, because it can impact all 17 SDGs in just a split second. So as we learned from Ambassador Mohammed from UNODA, she has stated that we need more trust. Trust is what NATO, UNODA, and the UN Charter needs as a whole, and also in transparency, because nations will proliferate their nuclear weapons if they are in fear of the other nations that are not disclosing any information. And now I'll give the floor to our next speaker, which will talk about Afghanistan and how this connects and embodied to the UNODA.
Yes, thank you, Nathan, for the informative speech. And now I'm Gian from Cornerstone Collegiate Academy of Seoul, and I'll go over some recent news where America withdraws from the Afghanistan war. Now, on July 8, 2021, President Joe Biden ordered that American troops withdraw from Afghanistan war by September 11, 2021, which is exactly 20 years since the 9/11 terror happened. America finally made this decision with Osama bin Laden killed on Operation Neptune Spear, with many casualties for both sides. And one of the biggest events in American history was when the Taliban leader Osama bin Laden was killed. For years, America has been looking for him and finally found out where he was hiding. This mission, called Operation Neptune Spear, involves 23 of the best SEALs from Team SEAL 6 in Navy SEAL. And let's go talk about with the Taliban. The relationship among the Taliban and the Afghan government is getting worse over time. Both sides have some of the people who served for either side released from service and blending back to civilian life. The process of their relationship to grow is just a matter of time. America is one of the strongest super countries around the world, and that does not mean America can take care of the Taliban easily, because they are not the only ones with heavy artillery and equipment. In some cases, the Taliban have a better and stronger weapon than they can use, because America has a limit of usage of mass destructions. And for the Taliban's position, this is a huge advantage, because most of their weapons used within the Taliban are provided by illegal dealers, and they do not have a limit. As for the trust of both sides is getting weaker. Civilian life in Afghanistan is on the other side of the world where there have to be many people who are in part of the Taliban or the government, such as the National Army, polices, and fighters are released and they blend into civilization again. 5,183 civilians were killed in the first half of 2021 during the war. Also, as a civilian, they fear that other countries are taking over, and most people feel anger about how other countries treat them like animals. You never know when they will pull their triggers, so you're never safe in Afghanistan. As the war continues, making a living was extremely hard because of all the surroundings and threats. And through Indicator 16.4.2 of SDG Goal 16, the UNODA gathers data on the illicit use, origin, and context of potential threat and weapons. The UNODA strongly emphasizes trust and thus continues to support the United Nations Trust Facility, supporting cooperation of armed regulations with the UNDP under the peacebuilding institution. As more and more threats have been growing as time passed by and they've evolved into a worldwide issue, and as more people know about it and more eyes are looking at everything. For the Afghan government, no one wants these kind of situations happening in their land, and their citizens are living. Of course, the government wants to keep the Taliban out of their land, but the truth is the Taliban power is a different level than what we think of. They're the strongest within their territory. So because of these reasons, the Afghan government cannot handle the situation. For a solution, Afghan government has heavily dependence on US and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, DDR will most likely have a similar result as it is now, instead of making progress, because you need a level of trust that can only be made over time. DDR in Afghanistan is accordance to the Afghan security sector, urges the Afghan government for national security reform to potentially develop consensus with the Taliban. And now I will give the floor to Minche.
Thank you, Jian. My name is Minche. And listening to two previous topics, some problem solving is needed. Education for disarmament can be very important to solve non-proliferation and our awareness of weapons and mass destruction. Our last topic is UNODA education. UNODA education provides education about disarmament, non-proliferation, about nuclear bombs, and others. In 2011, New York City high school students made a film about atomic bomb survivors. The survivors could share their experiences and voice the non-proliferation of nuclear bombs. After the filmmaking project, UNODA education kept educating students. But less than 10 activities, about 20 publications, and few podcasts and lectures had been done. Still more chances of disarmament education should be offered to students. So how many students would want education about disarmament? We surveyed 100 Korean middle and high school students about their awareness of disarmament. 75 students responded that they have never heard of disarmament or UNODA. Also, only 10 students were educated on disarmament and non-proliferation among those who already knew disarmament. After knowing the simple meaning of disarmament and UNODA, 60 students thought that disarmament is mandatory for the world peace. Furthermore, 67 students said that the education about disarmament is required. 80 students answered that they would like to have a session and lecture about disarmament if they got a chance. The survey is so meaningful. First, why education? We can get the information from the internet or chat. The importance of education comes from right information. Having accurate and credible knowledge is a great cornerstone. However, only few people learn disarmament through education. Most people got the information with films and the internet, which can include wrong and exaggerated information. Next, students want education. Students not only responded that education is essential for the world peace, disarmament education is essential for the world peace, but also have a will to get lectures and classes about disarmament. If they get more specialized education, students would be able to become more passionate about this. Not many teens were well knew about disarmament and non-proliferation of mass weapons or destruction, even had never encountered disarmament. So in December 2020, UNODA Education hosted Disarmament Education in Seoul with youth. The United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, which is known as UNODA, and the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, which is known as DPPA, collaborated on this lecture. Mark Bin-sung Kim, the member of UNODA and UNDPPA Northeast Asia Youth Steering Committee, developed the disarmament educating film for high school and university students. The students who watched this video could study about disarmament and as they equals 16 and could have an opportunity to learn about disarmament. Moreover, several students planned their own disarmament project inspired by the lecture. Nowadays, as the pandemic, virtual education is being used in another way. Last March, UNODA kicked off the online lecture Disarmament for Educators. The education program was directed with academic professors and educators from South Asia countries. This program can be found on UNODA education website, with two provided courses of self-paced and online instructor lead. We are looking forward to change of disarmament awareness with education. Education is the first step of enormous change. For now, disarmament is not the popular field, but with education, non-proliferation and disarmament would grow a little bit more. Now, I would like to introduce our next presenter who will present about youth engagement.
My name is Diane Lee from Branksome, Malaysia, and I will explain the importance of youth participation in these issues as the final topic. As leaders of the future and the largest generation of young people, youth has an important role in peace and democracy. The problem is that the efforts of young people are often ignored, especially in political activities for peace building and more. Even if their activities have limits, they can take action in multiple dimensions. Youth can work for disarmament, peace, and democracy in and beyond their communities. They can take action in significantly different ways from adults, but their efforts should not be brushed off, since they can act in very positive ways. While most youth cannot directly engage in political matters, they can make changes by raising awareness. They can participate in campaigns, workshops, surveys, and petitions. These efforts are relatively easy to practice, and people can participate in units of individuals or groups. Partnerships for global goals are also crucial for achievement. These partnerships between youth and other groups are helpful because they provide many chances of exchange between different generations. Sharing experiences and knowledge about conflict and social problems lead to various perspectives on them, ultimately speeding up the process of achieving the goal of peace. Youth whose activities rely heavily on connections with others can provide great help. Moreover, even though most young people cannot be influential officials, they can affect their communities' governments greatly. If they are attentive to the politics and policies of their countries and the world, they will be able to make changes through activism or sharing information on the internet. Youth has always been one of the biggest reasons governments around the world change for the better, and this is no exception for the young generation of this time. One case where youth took an active role in promoting peace with disarmament is the Youth for Disarmament Initiative by UNODA. The initiative educated and empowered youth to learn about disarmament in detail and had them participate in artistic activities expressing what disarmament means to them. It also included video challenges for raising awareness and running podcasts for peace building. Recently, the Youth for Disarmament Initiative called on young people to take part in the Step Up for Disarmament campaign by completing a distance of 8.29 kilometers in order to raise awareness of the International Day Against Nuclear Tests in August 2021. Ultimately, the Youth for Disarmament Initiative was successful. Young people who participated in the program could increase their knowledge about the meaning and importance of disarmament. Since disarmament is one of the most essential parts of peace, this proved that education could provide a chance for youth to be more passionate about achieving peace. They were also determined to give feedback and suggestions to UNODA. They helped make UNODA more accessible to a bigger audience, such as making its website more user-friendly. Furthermore, the initiative's art activities, such as the Art for Peace and the Poster for Peace contest, caught the attention of not only other young people, but also the general public. These efforts were effective in motivating people to learn more about disarmament issues. The United Nations is working to engage more young people for the SDGs, but most governments discourage them from expressing themselves instead of supporting their work. Then what could be done to make sure the voices of youth are heard? On a societal level, there should be more young people in political offices. Most people working in the political sector are relatively older, but more youth among them would result in more sustainable solutions in the future. On a smaller scale, people can empower or support youth-led projects and organizations. Additionally, there should be more training programs for young audiences to educate them about these global issues. With knowledge of the global goals, more youth would be inspired to take part in projects for peace. To wrap up, the efforts for SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions should be increased. The threat of the possession of weapons should not be ignored. As we mentioned before, weapons threaten the safety of multiple countries, as evident in the case of the Russian military power posing a threat to Latvia and the case of the Afghanistan war. In these times, when conflict-related weapon issues are ongoing and the awareness of the public about this is quite low, education is a necessity. Last but not least, extra efforts for youth to be actively engaged in these matters will help boost the progress toward achieving the goal of world peace. Thank you for listening to our presentation.
Yeah, that was it for our presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed this. So now we could get some questions if Thomas can moderate it.
Oh, sorry, I thought you're moderating. So 세범, 공연.
So I want to say that it was a very interesting lecture, and thank you to the groups. Thank you to the group for giving us the very informative speeches. Moving on to the question. As you may know, many of the disarmament treaties that have been signed are somewhat effective today. I personally believe that this is mainly because there's always been some sort of dichotomy between international politics and the interests of national governments of the different countries. In this case, what do you think are the roles of the UNODC or perhaps the role of the related organizations in solving the different problems?
If I can answer that, yes, international organizations and even governments take a huge role. Even if you look at the Mine Ban Treaty, the government had to consent to the UNODA to pursue such goals. And as the UN Charter says in Article 2, Paragraph 4, you cannot use coercion to tell or make or force any countries to do any action. So governmental organizations, international organizations have to consent to those, and they take a huge role in bolstering efforts, financial aid, and also spreading awareness to the general public. And as we said, youth education also is incorporated in that sector, as international organizations cover youth and educates those people about these such initiatives and so forth.
All right, thank you for the answer.
Thank you, 공연.
So I first wanted to say thank you for the informative speech. And then second of all, my question was about in general, you mentioned a lot about the NATO but then I don't think there was like a clear-cut definition presented or like much explanation on the organization. So I was wondering if you could just provide me some like basic information, if there is any, for NATO. And then I had another question about like, so you know how many large countries have many large countries like USA or like China have nuclear weapons, right? So I just wanted to ask the opinion of like your group who did research on UNODC and like weaponry and peace, whether or not there needs to be like complete denuclearization in the world to for like this idea of true peace or not. Yeah, thank you.
So if everyone's okay, I can answer that too. Yeah, I'm sorry for not explaining much about NATO. So NATO is a North Atlantic treaty organization which goes about security and defense of its member nations. So as I said, NATO Article 5, and as relation to SCG, all of them, NATO also never leaves anyone behind. They have a motto of not leaving anyone behind. As if you look at NATO Article 5, if one country is attacked, if one country is accused or attacked by any other aggression, the whole entire bloc is attacked, and they consider that attack as aggression to an international level, not only domestic and specific to that country. And to address your second question about the superpowers, so let me just tell you this. America, the US, and Russia compromises 90% of nuclear weapons. 90%. They compromise, just those two countries, they compromise 90%. Thus, if you want to prevent any conflict, it's really a bilateral problem too. The US and the Russian Federation, if we look at it, we need non-proliferation activities or many other initiatives to bring them down and narrow them in transparency and trust that neither of them will perhaps betray. And as our Ambassador Mohammed said, trust and transparency is what is important. And I state this again, but if we have trust and transparency, we know what other countries are doing. They disclose information and we don't have fear. But in case of not having trust and not disclosing any information and keeping them to themselves, such as if you look at, let's take a look, Russia. If they don't disclose any information about nuclear weapons and their weaponizing threats, the US only has the decision to proliferate their weapons in defense, in fear that Russia would somewhat use aggression and that weapons that they were developing. So it's the fear and in transparency that is creating the proliferations, and we need to stop that through trust.